Hi, and welcome to Salon Talks. I'm Brian Karaman. With me now is Senator Amy Klobuchar, and author of 4 books, which impresses me, including one that I've just started reading. And I found out that the senator and I share something in common. We were both fans of the game Monopoly as a
Yes.
kid. So I'm working my way through that book. And you
As
have
you
another one.
now learn, it was actually invented by a woman that got totally screwed.
Yes.
And she
Well, that's
actually meant it originally as an anti-monopoly game, and then it got ripped off and made into something different, but it was
but
her
you and I
game.
took the
So it's a
same
pretty wild
lesson from it.
story.
Yeah, it
Busy.
is. It's a great story, but you and I took the same lesson from it that there was an anti. I would win that game. I'm going, what's next? That's it seems like it's not quite fair, but anyway. Well,
You get a lot of those hotels and houses
yeah, just
by
by
luck of the
boardwalk.
draw, if you land on Park Place.
Yeah, that's it. But we're actually here today to talk a little bit about the administration. The Biden administration announced on the 29th of August that the first 10 drugs selected for Medicare for price negotiation, and I know you've had a lot to do with this, and this is part of the Inflation Reduction Act, and that so it's beginning in 2026. Medicare can directly negotiate to get better deals for seniors. Can you explain to us how this? It's going to save the average Medicare recipient a lot of money, but how does this work, and how does it affect others besides those on Medicare?
So to step back to explain how we got to where we are,
Yep.
about 20 years ago, the pharmaceutical companies, the big pharma companies, got written in a sweetheart deal into the law that they literally wrote that said there couldn't be any negotiation for less expensive prescription drugs under Medicare. It works great for the VA, and it should. For our veterans, they get much less expensive drugs. They negotiate, as do private entities all over the country and all over the world. So in this case, Medicare has to lock in and the drug companies get what they want. And so what we did, I led this bill for years and years and years, and very worked through many, many different administrations. And finally, we have gotten this done. And 2 game changers. The first is the president and his leadership wanting to get it done. The second is AARP actually put ads on against Pharma so that the members who were willing to take on Pharma at least had a major entity that had their backs, because otherwise we were just on our own. And the bill that passed allows first 10 drugs, then next year it'll be 15 more, then 15 more, then 20 more. These first 10 are blockbuster drugs. When you ask how it will save money, just last year, 9 million people were taking that drug. 9 million seniors were taking the top 10 drugs, and they spent, be ready, 3.4 billion, not million, 3.4 billion in out-of-pocket costs. That's the kind of money when we're talking about a drug like Xarelto or Eliquis. That's the kind of, those are blood clot drugs. Nearly 5 million people take those drugs alone in America. And then there's diabetes drugs like Januvia, and then there's psoriasis drugs in the top 10. And so basically now what will be unleashed is the market power. Last time I checked, we're in a capitalist system, the market power of negotiations instead of having big pharma lock in their profits. And so this is very exciting, and it's the beginning of what I hope will be more and more. Also, we had those insulin limits for seniors in that, in this is all in that Inflation Reduction Act, $35 per month limit. You're now seeing, and this is what I think will happen with some of these other drugs, in that case, you're seeing some pharmaceutical companies actually say, you know what, we're going to offer the $35 insulin limit to other people who aren't seniors, because it's really hard to explain why you're charging someone 35 and someone else 100.
Yeah.
And so that is going to be one of the natural outcomes. So in answer to one piece of this that people ask me sometimes, okay, I'm not a senior, how does this help me? 2 big ways. One, it's your taxpayer money that's helping paying all these inflated prices for these drugs, because Medicare is taxpayer funded. That will be helpful to everyone. And the second one is maybe less obvious, but when you start negotiations for the biggest drug buying group in America, seniors, 50 million, you're going to start seeing price reductions in other ways.
But and you and I both know, big pharma doesn't sit still for this. They're going to push back. And you are filing an amicus brief in Merck versus Becerra. Can you explain to me how they're pushing back and why you're filing this amicus brief?
Sure. So they tried so hard to stop us from passing this bill. They had 3 lobbyists for every member of Congress. They spent hundreds of $millions. And guess what? The public won. And that was in the Democratic bill, the Inflation Reduction Act. However, they didn't stop there. So now they are suing. Multiple companies are suing in many different courts. And so what we did, a group of us, Peter Welch, who's the new senator, but longtime congressman for the state of Vermont, he and I actually filed what's called an amicus brief, and we got a number of other senators on the brief with us that argues to the court that, and this was in a Merck case, that argues to the court that the Senate and members of Congress have every right to do something like this. In fact, it was Congress that gave them this sweetheart deal to begin with. So of course we can change the law and take it away. But they're arguing that somehow they should be protected and that somehow this is taking things away from them. So we are, of course, on the side of the administration in arguing the case that this was a dutifully and carefully passed provision that actually came out of years of hearings about how prices for drugs for seniors and non-seniors had gone sky high since this had been locked in. We are paying in America 250% more for our drugs than you see in other industrialized nations. It's an outrageous situation. So that's a case that we make in this amicus brief, which means friends of the court.
Yes, I've had a few of them filed in my behalf when I was fighting for my First Amendment. I know it, yeah, but I'm glad you.
So you know what it is. You like all these nice friends of the court if they're on your side.
That's it. They're always friends of the court when they're on my side. Look, you bring up a very interesting point, and it goes to some of the work that you've done in a book that I've recently started reading of yours, which is called Antitrust: Taking on Monopoly Power from the Gilded Age, right, to the Digital Age. And, it was Teddy Roosevelt. You bring up something very beautiful in the book about trust busting and the fact that we used to, some of what we're seeing as far as the accumulation of wealth in big pharma is because they've accumulated, they've consolidated. And you've been one of those who've been advocating for busting up these monopolies. Do you think that can, and there's a chapter I haven't gotten to yet, but the last chapter you're talking about how we can keep from monopolies. So how can we solve this problem in the future?
Have you read the 200 footnotes yet?
Yeah, I wanted to tell you, I had 75.
No, not 200 footnotes. I'm sorry, 200 pages
of footnotes. I had 75 in mind.
I'm not going to quiz you on. I don't expect, but okay. So yeah, it got on the New York Times bestseller list for 1 week.
Yeah, mine too. I think I beat you by 2 weeks.
I tried to make it 2 weeks. Yeah, are good. Yeah. I tried to make it accessible and telling stories like about the game Monopoly and the like, because it's a huge deal, antitrust, and we're seeing more and more consolidation in pharmaceuticals, in technology. Google has 90% market share for search engines alone. And in the past, courts got very involved in these things. The AT&T breakup resulted in lower long distance rates, like way lower long distance rates, and the burgeoning at the time cell phone market. When they started this, the cell phones were the size of a brick. And because of competition, we are where we are today. But sadly, the Supreme Court over the years have really limited their ability to bring these antitrust cases. So I argue in the book and in person in my job for some tweaks to the antitrust laws to make it easier to bring the cases, for funding for the agencies. And when it comes specifically to pharmaceuticals, as I'm the chair of the antitrust subcommittee with Mike Lee, we were most known this year for our very interesting hearing we did on Ticketmaster together, which brought in all kinds of like Taylor Swift fan protesters. It was something. So the pharma part of it, though, is interesting because they have monopolies in a weird way. They have drugs, and then they pay their competitors, their generic competitors, no one can believe this, to get their products off the market so they don't compete. And so Senator Grassley and I have a bill called Pay for Delay, which the practice is called Pay for Delay, a bill that would stop them from doing that. Another thing they do is file sham petitions to stop the approval of competitors. And they also do something called product hopping, which is they add tiny little changes and then take out a new patent so that people can't compete with them. So those three practices are actually the subject of three different bills, two of which I lead with Senator Grassley, and one of which is Senator Blumenthal and Senator Cornyn bill. We've actually passed those through the Judiciary Committee. So we would love to get them to the floor as part of the momentum we're seeing out of the negotiation on drug prices, out of the insulin caps. We're finally taking on pharma. And to me, the next step is this patent system, really, which is related to having monopolies, because they're basically trying to stop their competitors from getting on the market or paying them to get out of the market.
Well, you bring up a very interesting point there. One of the things that I wrote about is that in my business and in journalism, there is a huge consolidation of media over the years. And in all industries, as you point out in your book, it's in every industry. The consolidation is pretty much in every
industry. Food, sunglasses.
Yeah. Media.
John Oliver just did a piece a few years ago, and we actually had to call him because it was very funny, as he is. And it ended with, he said, so if this all makes you want to die, good luck, because there's only 3 coffin makers left in the United States of America. And then we had to call him and tell him that one bought the other, so there were only 2.
That's
so, and the problem is consumer prices, lack of innovation, all of these things, it catches up. It's not, you don't see evidence of it immediately, but what you're seeing in the tech area with regard to the media is Facebook and Google have so much power that when the media companies are saying, wait a minute, we did that piece, we should get reimbursed for our content. When you put, not links, but when you put snippets up, we should be reimbursed. And the media companies just go, sorry, we're getting out of your market. That's what they did in Australia. That's what they are, but Australia actually took them to task. $200 million has now switched hands from the platforms to media companies, including small ones, small little newspapers, radio stations. Things going on in Canada right now where Trudeau stood up to them. So Senator Kennedy and I have a bipartisan bill. We've gotten it through the committee now twice, and we're ready to get a floor vote on that.
Well, to your point, 95% of what you see, read, or hear are owned by 6 media companies, and there are vast media deserts across the country where there aren't, no small newspapers anymore, because vulture cap, I know they're venture capitalists, I call them vulture capitalists, have swooped in and owned several hundred newspapers. But to your point, I want to bring up something that you wrote. The freedom to buy and sell goods and succeed on your own merit has long been at the core of American antitrust policy. But more important, a century before antitrust laws were even considered, the freedom to participate in a competitive market was a central guiding tenet of the American economy. It is one of the major reasons our country was founded in the first place, when a ragtag group of settlers and I love the ragtag part, group of settlers and colonists decided to start a new life in a new land. So to those who are saying, unfettered capitalism, there is an answer to it, is there not? And I hear this all the time. You want socialism, you want communism. They want unfettered capitalism without ever seeing what the end product of unfettered capitalism is.
Right. So I have one of the highest rates, number 1 in the Senate for bipartisan bills, right? Number 3 for passing bills.
Yeah.
And in this area of antitrust, I will tell you, it has been completely bipartisan, except for maybe 1 or 2 bills. It's just that we have to move these forward. So why is it that in the past you've seen support from conservatives on antitrust? Well, people like Adam Smith, the godfather of capitalism, who was an economist, not from our country. That was a lot of attention paid to his work by the founding fathers. It was not only about the invisible hand. He warned about the unbridled power of the standing army of monopolies. That was his word. So as time went on and they didn't do something about it right away, there started to be this movement, and it started in the Midwest, actually, with the farmers, the Granger movement, the unions. But at its core were Democrats and Republicans. When the Sherman Act passed, it had strong bipartisan support. It
Yes.
was led by a Republican out of Ohio, Senator Sherman, who was close to Abraham Lincoln. And then Teddy Roosevelt, a Republican president, came in and was the first one to really enforce the Sherman Act. And from there, you had other presidents, a group of them called the Progressive Era, that actually moved forward on it. So the history of this, including AT&T, everything, spans Democratic and Republican presidents. It spans Congresses and authors that were both parties. So that's why I am always able, especially given some of the people I work with on these bills, I'm able to make the case that this is not some socialism. It's not. And in fact, the companies will use that all the time. And then they'll say it limits innovation in Democratic states and Republican states. They'll use the kind of socialism argument and the like. And it's crazy. They literally use opposite arguments. One, they'll say, oh, it limits content moderation if you do something
Right.
And then they're like, oh, it allows for. So they use opposite arguments all the time. So I think the time has come. It's not going to be tomorrow. The House will not move on some of these bills right now. They might move on the pharma bills, however. And I just keep pushing the issue, and eventually I will triumph. It has triumphed in other countries. They're agreeing to things. And also, let's not act like I'm out here by myself, which
No.
some days it feels like it. But the Justice Department under both Trump and Biden have taken this on. And that some of these tech suits started under Macon Delrahim, who is the head of Antitrust under Trump, and they're being continued now, of course, under Jonathan Cantor, who works for Merrick Garland in the Biden Justice Department. So usually the success in the past has been when it's bridged different administrations. So
Absolutely.
that's why I'm bullish on that we're eventually going to move forward on this.
Senator, I appreciate your time with us, and good luck in the future on this particular piece of legislation. Anytime you're busting up monopolies, peace and love to you. So God bless.
All
Thank you
right.
very much.
Thank you so much.